Hello and welcome once again to another review with me, the Whiskey Novice. Good to have you back. I'm glad you're here, and we're staying with Bushmills core range. We've done white label, red label, black bush, and now we're moving on to this green label fella, which is now into the single malt range. And we're going to get straight in. What is a single malt? Because remembering that these videos that I'm trying to do here aren't just for whiskey lovers who have been around. I mean, at some point we all had to learn what this terminology meant. And certainly things like malt, whiskey, single malt is a terminology that you'll hear in the whiskey world an awful lot. But as I say, people that are new to it don't always know what it means. So what is the single malt? Well, I'm actually going to reverse it and explain what the malt is first. Basically, malt is, in the terms of single malt, they're talking about malted barley. And what they do is they take the barley, they soak it and force it to germinate. And when that happens, then they dry it again using various techniques, which I will go into at a later date, because the drying of the barley affects an awful lot. So as I say, I'm not going to dip too far into that right now. That is malted barley at its basic terms, soaked, germinates and dried again before the process continues. Single, what do they mean when they say single? Well, basically it comes from one distillery. This is single malt, made by Bushmills, in the Bushmills distillery, only made by Bushmills. So it's not like as if it's blended or anything. That's basically, I've been using blends, I've been talking about blends before. This is a single malt. Just to complicate things ever so slightly further, it's a 10-year-old single malt, but that doesn't mean that it's only 10-year-old whiskey in here. The youngest whiskey in here is 10 years old. Basically, like with all distilleries, Bushmills will have a template which says that this is how we want this whiskey to look, this is how we want it to smell, this is how we want it to taste, this is what we want the texture to be like. And that template has to be adhered to. So in order to do so, they'll take your 10-year-old flavour profile, and if it requires older whiskies, certainly not younger, it requires older whiskies to go there to get that flavour profile and to attain what they're trying to get here, then that's what they do. So, but the youngest whiskey in this is 10 years old. That's just a few pointers and tips as to get into a single malt. We'll be doing more single malts, but I just wanted to get it out of the way. That this is, as I say, it's terminology that you'll hear quite a bit, doesn't always get explained. This bottle itself was gifted to me by a very good friend of mine who knew my thoughts on Bushmills and knew that I wasn't exactly blown away by it. That's probably the easiest way to put it. Bushmills were capable of good things. It's from our county, as I've explained before. It's something that I was slightly disappointed by it, and he gifted this to me to try and change my mind on Bushmills. And before I even go into sampling it, he didn't necessarily change my mind on Bushmills, but he did prove to me that they're capable of making very, very good whiskey, because I genuinely like this. I know before I even go into sampling it that I like this whiskey. Let's see, is there anything on the bottle that's telling us matured in bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks for a minimum of 10 years. So that's explaining, a minimum of 10 years. Giving this whiskey a smooth, there's that word again, honeyed flavour and hint of ripe fruit. Well, the ripe fruit we've hit on with Bushmills before, and it certainly is abundant. Triple distilled, matured in 2 woods. Another thing that you'll learn about whiskey in general, and I'm gonna I'll hit on this at later dates. I don't want to go too deep into it. That even when they say it's matured in 2 woods, this could have spent 9.5 years or more in bourbon casks, which is no bad thing. I mean, if that's what it takes, if that works, fair enough. But it could have spent then 6 months in the Oloroso sherry cask. Cask influence on whiskey is probably one of the, I mean, your flavour profile will start at the barley. I mean, the choice of barley, what barley's used to get that, because they're different breeds, there's different kinds. In the making of your new make spirit, which is what is distilled, is then there'll be a flavour come from it. Yet again, I don't want to go too deep into this, but cask influence then is where you can make or break a whiskey. I think anyway, could be wrong, but it can be very easily changed. Now, you'll notice I didn't pour this. It was already in the glass. As I've explained before, I do like to give my whiskey a while to settle in the glass, and I think, you know, certainly whenever you get into whiskies of a higher breed, or, you know, they do tend, to me, give them the time they deserve. I heard a quote that if you allow a minute in the glass for every year in the barrel is a good rule of thumb, but you would be doing yourself out of some very good non-aged statement whiskies by doing that. So the way I look at it is just let it settle. This has probably had about 15 minutes. It was capped for a while, so I'll maybe at times I'll pour my whiskey. This is just a little clear cap, fits over it, sits there. And what you're doing in doing so is you're opening the whiskey up a bit. You're giving the air a chance to get at it and let it breathe. When that's sitting in the bottle, especially, I mean, this has just gone below the shoulder, so it hasn't been opened that long, and hasn't had that much time to get the air and oxidate a little. If you give it a while in the glass, I mean, that's all air, and as soon as when you're taking the cap off, you're letting that air out further. So it gives it a chance to open it up a little. And if you look, not a bad colour. I mean, I suppose you would say that's straw coloured. They don't add an awful lot. It's chill filtered. We'll get into chill filtration and adding colour yet again at a later time. Quite good legs on it. Yet again, I've said it before about Bushmills that they do. There's a texture with it. Straight into the nose, and as soon as you get your nose into this Bushmills 10-year-old, and this is what I loved about it. I explained before about the white label and the red label and the black bush. There's a fresh white fruit salad. I'm going to talk about white fruit. I'm talking specifically about like apples and grapes and bananas. White, what you would generally know as white fruit. Getting into this one, there's more depth. There's more depth of flavour of fruit. There's kiwi in there. There's a slight, very slight. When I say chemical, I don't mean it's not chemical. Detergent. I think that detergent's the word I'm looking for. There's a slight, ever so slight detergent thing on the back of it, but it's not off-putting. It doesn't spoil it. The fruit is all over it. It's just blasting with fruit, but just really, really juicy fruit. I know they talk about, well, obviously there's a sherry influence on it, which is probably bringing the sweetness forward. Although that being said, if it's bourbon cask too, bourbon is going to tend to bring that sweetness forward as well. But I do genuinely like the nose on this whiskey. Now, once again, I've said it about Bushmills. If you wanted to nose whiskey all day, Bushmills is a great whiskey for it. But then you've got to taste it at some point. And yet again, when I talk about nosing, I always find that, and this is just personal preference, but you do hear other ones talking about it. If you keep your mouth open slightly, it tends to let your nosing let the air through better and almost avoids the sinus area, so it just comes straight in and gives me a better idea of what's going on. But as I say, each to their own. On the nose, very beautiful, very fruity, very sweet, but not so sweet it's sickening. So into the palate. And it does what I knew it was going to do because I've had it before. The palate doesn't necessarily fulfill what the nose is telling you it's going to do. I find the palate a bit weak. It softens up an awful lot and doesn't, as I said, just all that fresh fruit channels itself into, there's still, it's more of a citrusy thing then. All the apple, which is all over the nose, all that kiwi, as I said earlier on, and fresh white fruit, just becomes quite pointed and sort of just does not translate into the palate. It's still a good palate. There's no denying it's a good palate. But what I'm going to do, because, and yet again, I've said this before, experience has taught me this, with this whiskey in particular, that a little drop of water with the good old measuring device. And yet again, I'm not going in with a whole lot of water because it doesn't need it. So you'll probably see there's a little drop, but I'm just giving it. Now you can't, as I've said before, be very, very careful adding water to Irish. I find most Irish whiskies, you know, this is bottled at 40%, which I forgot to mention earlier on. So it's you know, there's not a lot of room there. If you drop, certainly if you go down below, I would imagine 35%, then you've pretty much drowned it. You're going to lose an awful lot of what's going on. So that little drop of water has basically turned the volume up in the nose. The nose hasn't changed, it's just turned up. It's maybe got a little drier, if that makes sense, on the nose. You know, it's not just as juicy anymore. Yet again, this is something I found with Bushmills. I think I've explained this before. You add water, the nose dims down, but the palate tends to turn up. And I'm saying, I just said that the nose turned up a moment ago, but as I said, at the same time, it hasn't turned up. It's flattened almost. You know, it's bringing it out, but it's. Let's go back into the palate before I take a hole for myself. Yeah, as I expected, the fruit starts to come back on the palate, and starts to coat the tongue more, and it's more. Now, you're taking a bit of the texture, a bit of the grip out of it. There's no denying that, but it does turn up the flavour. It's quite dry. I wouldn't go as far as to saying it's astringent. It's not really. There's just a dry edge on it. You get that malt. You can get the malt. The maltiness is there, getting onto the back of the palate. The finish, before I added the water, was quite short, and not really, quite nondescript. There was nothing really there. It's still quite short. It's quite a rounded whiskey. It doesn't fight you yet again. It's I imagine, I'm not a big fan of adding things to my whiskey, but I imagine it would make a great cocktail because it's very, very fruity, very sweet, but bittersweet, you know, so I imagine it would take a mixer very, very well. There's still a certain amount of pepperiness, and I would say it is pepperiness. It's not, describe it as anything else, I don't think, at the back of the palate. But that hasn't, the finish itself is still, even with the drop of water. I vaguely remember before thinking that the water brought a finish to it, but now it's, but definitely that drop of water has brought the palate to life. And look, what I'll say it again, you know, I'm trying to be honest about all these whiskies as I describe them. I'm describing them as I drink them, and this is to me the best of the core range of Bushmills. Now, I'll be going into one next, my next review, which isn't necessarily the core range, but I'll explain that when I get there. But certainly, I mean, you're into the single malts. There's a touch of class. I'm not sure whether that's the right word, but certainly whenever you move into single malts, to me that's when a distillery starts to wear its big boy pants, you know, and say, look, this is a single malt, and this is a good single malt. If you are starting single malts, it's an affordable Irish single malt, and at 10 years old, it's relatively young, and that probably translates into it a bit, but there's loads and loads and loads of flavour in it, and that doesn't really dissipate. It's still there on the nose. As I say, maybe the water ramped it and then dropped it again very quickly, but full of flavour, really, really full of flavour. Finish still a bit disappointing, but listen, I think I've said enough about this. Thank you for joining me once again. I look forward to you coming back the next time, and I'll just say for now, bye bye, and here's to your good health. Cheers. Hey, thanks for watching my video. Please click and subscribe to be notified of further content.